Hello everyone, welcome to Court with Krissy and Licking County Municipal Court, where you can't rewind. I joined this bench trial just as the state rested. The defendant, she's here because she failed to maintain control of her vehicle. She hit a slickery section on a weather emergency day. For my friends across the pond, it's one of your peeps. British driver versus black ice. I hope you like it. Court with Krissy is now in session.
Admitted without objection. Does the state rest?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Crofton, as I mentioned, you do have a right to address the court or to present a defense, although you're not required to. Obviously, you know that the burden is on the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You're under no obligation to call any witnesses, introduce any evidence, or even testify, and your decision not to take the witness stand cannot be held against you. But you also do have a due process right to present a defense by calling other witnesses, by introducing evidence or exhibits into the record, and by testifying on your own behalf. If you elect to do so, you are required to either swear or affirm to tell the truth when you're testifying, and you'll have to answer any other questions that the prosecutor might have for you at the conclusion of your testimony. So that being said, other than yourself, do you have any witnesses that you'd like to call?
Yes,
Okay.
the person that helped me prepare to drive that day, and that same person also helped me when the crash happened, helped me during my 911 call, and helped me to...
And what is that individual's name?
That's Ethan Messer.
I'm sorry?
Ethan Messer.
Mr. Messer, please come forward and be sworn.
And then face me and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury? Please have a seat. For the record, give your name and spell your last name.
My name is Ethan Messer, M-E-S-S-E-R.
And your address?
All right. You may inquire of your witness.
Do I stand up or I stay?
You can sit, you can stand if it's more comfortable for you, whatever you prefer.
I guess just the question I have is, in your view, with assisting with the conditions that day and the temperatures that day and the road, knowing that you've driven on the road and the distance between the property and the crash itself, in your...
Can we ask one question at a time here? I'm not sure.
The court's going to construe that as an objection as to
Yes.
the form. So you're asking what's called a compound question, which is just what we lawyers call a question that asks a bunch of different questions at the same time. So if you just ask one question at a time, allow the witness to answer, and then move on to your next question. So you can begin with your first question.
Once the car was on the main road in the black ice that was there, that had not been salted, do you think that any person could have kept control of their vehicle when they hit a long
I'm going to
spot of
object
black
to
ice?
speculation, Your Honor.
Well, there's been no foundation laid that he's familiar with that road and those conditions, but I'll allow it as opinion testimony. So you may answer the question, sir.
This was very slick ice. I walked the entire distance from the driveway down to the crash location. There was, immediately at the bottom of the driveway, there's always an accumulation of ice. And then there was a stretch of road where there was good traction for my feet. And I can only assume that is where she tested her brakes, because I talked to her before she left and I asked her, test your brakes, don't go very far. If you feel any ice on the road, please just turn around, it's not worth it. So she tested her brakes where there was traction. Further down the walk, when I was walking to her car, I started hitting, it was virtually invisible, the road just appeared wet. You couldn't actually see the ice very well. If you look at the pictures, this is daylight, this was dark, it was more shiny, it just kind of looked wet. It was extremely slick. I almost fell several times. I was actually genuinely concerned I was going to fall and maybe even hit my head, and nobody was around me. She just knew that I was on my way there. I was actually thinking maybe I should have put my bicycle helmet on, before I walked down there. It was very slick for a very long period of time after there was traction. I can only assume that what she told me is she tested her brakes, because this is what I asked her to do. Test your brakes, leave the driveway, make sure there's traction before you continue. And the ice was just, it was like ice rink slick. I do not believe if anybody assumed that the road had been salted, and you were going, I don't even think it would have been controllable going. The only way you could control would be like, you would have to know there was ice on the road, which she did not, and you would have to go extremely slow. She has a front-wheel drive car. She has all-season tires. The car, she told me the car slid in a very excessive amount of time. We measured it on Google Earth, and it could have been in excess of 100 yards. A very, very long slide.
Well, at this time, Ms. Crofton's going to need to ask another question because you're kind of just giving a narrative response, which is not permitted under the rules of evidence. So your next question, Ms. Crofton.
I don't have any more questions.
Any cross?
Yes, thank you. Do you live in Ohio?
Yes,
Okay, how long have you lived in Ohio?
my entire life.
Okay, so both you and Miss Crofton, according to your testimony, were aware that there was ice.
We were aware of the weather reports. I had salted the driveway the night before.
Okay, and you stated that there is accumulation of ice at the end of your driveway.
Just at the very end,
Okay.
where it's like the water kind of always flows down and freezes.
Okay, and then, is it abnormal during these times for parts of the road to be not so icy and other parts to be icy?
Not to this extreme. This was very abnormal.
Right, but you were able to drive that car back to the house, correct?
I was aware of the ice because I had traversed it on foot, and it was extremely slick.
Sure, but you are all aware of the weather reports and that there was a possibility of ice, correct?
Yes.
And it could be traversed if you were slowing your vehicle down, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. No
Very
further questions.
excessively slow. Yes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Crofton, you have the right to ask follow-up questions based on the questions that the prosecutor asked your witness. Do you have any questions for Mr. Messer?
Knowing that there is ice, though, having prepared our driveway and salted it, having thought that a salt truck had already been down the road, again with a level 2 snow emergency, would you have chosen to drive on that road in either a manual car or an automatic car? At that time in 6:15, when it was just above freezing with the level 2 snow emergency on that road?
Without snow tires, if I had been aware of the ice that was on the road, which I would have tested for, I would have braked, I would have tested for traction. Had I been unfortunate enough to be unaware of the ice, I would have driven. Had I been aware of that ice, it was so bad, I would not have trusted I would not have trusted my driving ability to drive down that road. It was the type of ice where I believe is so slick, I do not believe driver's skill could always make up for it. It was that type of ice, the type of ice where you can see some videos of it where a car can be going 5 miles an hour and kind of just slide down a gentle slope. It was very slick where I almost slipped on foot.
Okay. Any additional questions?
No, thank you.
Any recross?
You're aware it was a level 2?
I was not aware of it was a level 2 until after the crash. I had looked it up.
No questions, thank you.
All right, Mr. Messer, you may step down. Thank you very much. You can go ahead and retake your seat in the gallery. Other than Mr. Messer and yourself, were there any other witnesses that you wish to call?
No, those are the only people there that day apart
And-
from the trooper.
And do you wish to testify on your own behalf?
Yes.
Then please come forward and be sworn. And bring up with you any evidence that you intend to testify about.
You solemnly swear, do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Please have a seat. For the record, you're going to give your name and spell your last name.
Chloe Crofton, Crofton.
Thank you. And your address. Thank you.
All right. You don't have a lawyer to take you through your testimony with questions, so basically, it's just you giving me your side of things, and you can start whenever you're ready.
So I just going to try and be really simple and quick, and I have a statement that's in the trooper has, as well as his Q&A with me. I just want to point out at the beginning that those evidence things, what I'm looking at with that photograph, one of some he's taken, and his statement from me were a significant amount of time after the actual crash. So any conditions and description of the road is not on point with time as when it actually happened at 6:20, 6:15. So I have a photograph of the darkness and the condition at the time that kind of shows the patchy ice. I have a video we're assessing the car damage. If you want to put that, if I'm allowed to put that into evidence, I have a map that shows the distance where the road which I live on since I've moved here, of how far I drove and where I think I skidded and where my car ended up as well. And I also have a weather report which shows that it was above freezing at that time, that we were under a level 2 snow emergency. When the trooper arrived, as I said, the conditions were different. So when I drove, I was the only person on the road at that time. And so the accuracy, the weather was changing every 10 minutes. I'm really the only witness to my own crash because there was no one else around. And the conditions were changing very regularly. So in a quick summary, I was on my own. I had to drive to work because I didn't have a manager to call me off. We don't have managers on site on some days until 10 a.m. My shift was supposed to start at 6:30 a.m. So I couldn't call off, knowing that there was a snow emergency. 7 hours before I drove, my partner, who I live with, prepared the driveway for me and prepared my car for me, knowing that there was ice and I would have to potentially drive on it if the temperature had not warmed enough by 6:10 in the morning, and gave the instructions about testing my brakes. So our driveway was completely salted, the driveway had great traction, and my car was melted because it was done before any more rain, so my car was ready to go, and a path to the car. So then when I set off in the morning, I had traction with my shoes all the way to my car in the driveway, and my car was ready to go. And I had all the instructions, so I went down our driveway, that I had tested carefully for traction, and I felt complete traction. Therefore I had the confidence to continue on my journey carefully. I then reached a slightly lower than normal speed. I went back and checked the speed later on another day of how I usually am at that point in the road, where I think I remember starting to skid, and where I'd also tested my traction and looked at the speeds, and it was approximately 29, 30-ish. I can't say because I don't have any. I have like not a strong memory of the whole crash because it was, some of the memories returned to me later because I was under a lot of stress when I crashed. I didn't remember everything really perfectly of where I skidded or what happened to my car during the collision with the hill. So anyway, that was my approximate speed, which is lower than I would be going under perfect conditions. And as I sped up to that fair speed for the road, it's a downhill straight. Then at some point, about halfway between where I crashed and the house, I skidded, and then once as I said, began to skid, I don't feel like any reasonable person in any type of vehicle could have retrieved the control of the car, which is why I was asking about sudden emergency, because once I lost that control, I maintained some type of a line down the road. I didn't crash off to the left or right. There was some length of time and distance where my car continued in an extended skid, where I did not have control over the steering or the brakes. And now in my mind, and I'm focusing on trying to avoid a crash, I'm just trying to keep control of the car, and I continued skidding, and the only time that I actually ended up coming off of the road was around a corner where there's been 2 other crashes in the last 5 weeks, one after mine and one before mine. It's like a blind brow, it's a really strange angle, and by my car having to go around to that left, that's when I finally lost physical control, like complete control, and that's how I ended up going into the hill, because at that point my car changed direction. Even with my steering, it then had to go slightly to the left, and that's what made it veer into this slope. And I didn't damage anybody's property or anything. I was able to not get injured, and my car damage is not as extensive as it really could have been. The trooper arrived a lot later. By then, it's light. The ice has started to melt, so the prosecution is recommending that other people would have driven fine on it is not relevant, because it's a completely different time of day. The conditions changed. It was warming. It was above freezing when I was out there. And so these photographs and that temperature and that analysis of how well the trooper could drive or how well somebody else could drive has nothing to do with my crash, because they're in a different timeline to my crash. My crash was between 6:15 and 6:25 in the morning after the road started to thaw. The other main thing to mention is that I believe that a salt truck had already been down our road. I live on Possum Hollow. It's a joining road between like a Stewart and Cedar, And we are pretty well ploughed. We don't have any people that live on the road, but we have a significance because the plough trucks and salt can go, they don't have to dead end. They use our road as a joining road to do the other roads. And we heard the truck in the middle of the night, and I was under the impression that it had been salted already. So when I was testing my brakes, I was re-clarifying my mind. Great, that's wonderful. The salt truck did come. That is what I heard. And that is the only reason I continued on my journey. I love my job. I have to do early morning shifts, even though I don't sleep very well, so I don't like to do mornings, but I do them because I care about my job. And sometimes I have, like I said, I have to go in and I cannot communicate with a manager. In the level 2 snow emergency, I should have been able to call my manager, which is one of the other issues of how this has happened, and then they would have probably told me, do not come in. So given that, I regret being on the road, and as the trooper had asked, could you have avoided it? I said no, and I still believe that's why I asked my witness who would drive the road all the time. He has a manual car, I have an automatic car. Even, I guess the only way that somebody could control the car on the ice that I hit would be to have been in a 4-wheel drive, or have the things wrapped on your tyres that they use, like in West Virginia, which can damage the road. And just to say, obviously I understand that the vehicle lost control and that I was the driver. However, I feel in this instance, with all the crashes that happened that morning around, with the snow emergencies, the black ice, people were not able to control their cars. I feel that emergency, although stated that in this state weather is not any excuse, I still believe that in my instance, and in other people's instances probably too, that the failure to control doesn't completely show what had happened to that person. It's not the same, it shouldn't be the same charge as somebody simply not driving well and losing control of their car.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you had some exhibits. If you want those to be admitted, you're going to have to testify about them and describe what they are.
Sure, that's fine, okay.
So you can proceed.
The USB stick, where would
I believe we could use the laptop.
That's fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can utilize that computer over there.
This is a video.
Okay, the car spun around here.
A video, my witness explaining the damage to my car not long after the crash. Obviously it's in the dark, and it just shows an assessment of where my car ended up. And if you look, this really to explain the road condition, how the patchy ice, how it really looks kind of like rain, but that it was not complete ice. So I did have a mixture of things, but at the same time the condition is that it's extremely slippery, but it basically shows my car as well. It's just a few seconds total.
This is where it ended up. It hit here. I guess it almost flipped, went up this hill here. This is the car's resting point. Really, there's the pieces of the car.
And then just one photograph, we really didn't have much at all, because we were focused on trying to get the crash report, waiting for the trooper and calling car insurance and getting my car back to the house. This is just a photograph that shows that in the dark, the strange surface with it being slippery but patchy ice, and it was almost impossible to walk on. And that's all stuff I have for audio visual.
Okay. I know that the bailiff gave you some exhibit stickers. We're going to need to put an exhibit sticker on this if you'd like to admit that flash drive into evidence.
Okay.
You use letters, and since that's the first one you testified about, let's go ahead and call that Defendant's Exhibit A. Are you asking the court to admit that into evidence?
Yes.
Any objection?
Nope.
Very well. Defendant's A will be admitted without objection, and you can just put it right there on the flash drive.
Again, give that to you.
Yeah, you can pull it out and then just wrap it around the flash drive. And did you have any other exhibits that you wish to testify about?
Just to, weather report's not really important, but it just shows the, it's not an I couldn't get the weather station near where I live, but it's John Glen, so it's not as close, but it shows how the temperature was rising. So the ice was changing dramatically between when I crashed and later on when the trooper assessed the situation. So that's just basically a weather forecast highlighting the time of.
Were you offering that into evidence?
No, it's
Okay.
stated.
And then anything else?
Just a map that would show having traction or not. It shows the route between my house and where I crashed. It's a Google map. It shows the complete distance of 340 yards between where I touched the main road to begin my journey and ended at the main road where I crashed. And then 2 X's marking the approximate where I think that I started to slide. But it just gives you more of an idea of the ice being, to begin with, it being some grip and then changing. You can see that the ice, the road can change, but you can see trees on here. So the bit where I first had traction was covered by trees, and I don't know how that would be, but the bit that was more icy was not covered by trees. So I don't understand the science behind that, but that is what happened. And this kind of shows that, but it does show the complexity, like you looked at these other images from the prosecution and the trooper, of the distance between and the long slide, of how I don't think it'd be avoidable sliding for that long, not crashing in some other manner, really.
Did you wish to inspect the exhibit?
Sure, I'll look at it. May I approach?
Please do.
It's not marked.
So the
Are you
yellow
marking
line
this-
is
no, are
my
you
house to
marking
the
this as
crash
an-
and 2
Hold
X.
on, are you marking it as an exhibit?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, that'll be B, since that's the second one that you talked about. And I'll take that. So are you offering this into evidence as
Yeah,
well?
yes.
Any objection?
No.
All right. Okay, so defense exhibits A and B will be admitted. Do you have anything you'd like to add to your testimony?
no, I think I've explained my position in full to you.
All right, very well. Cross-examination, Mrs. Moore?
Thank you. So you knew that your driveway and the vehicle were not covered with ice because you had taken measures knowing that the weather was bad, knowing that it was a level 2, correct?
I don't know if at that time if we knew it was a level 2. We knew about, we kept constantly looking at the temperatures and the prediction of precipitation, so
Right,
we
but
knew.
you talked about you didn't have a manager to call, or else you would have called?
Correct, I don't have a
Okay,
manager on
so
site.
you were anticipating that there may be weather issues?
Yes.
Okay. And you then got on the roadway and you talk about the long skid before you came to a stop, correct?
Mhm.
All right. And then I know you talked about the difference between when the trooper was there, but you called the state patrol at 6:56,
Mhm.
right? And you stated that you wrecked between 6:15 and 6:20,
Yes.
and the trooper arrived at 7:37.
Yeah, it was
So
over.
it really wasn't that much time between.
It was a lot of time, it was a lot of thawing,
Okay.
and it became light.
And your husband was able to drive the vehicle from that location back to your residence?
So that's my partner, that's not my...
Sorry, I'm sorry, I made it.
Sorry.
My fault, your partner.
He drove it, I don't know, 5-6 miles an hour, and it was damaged. My car had the thing dragging at the front, so it was basically hobbling back. It was not
I just asked, was he able to drive it back to your residence?
technically driven yet.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Now, you have a right to add to your testimony based on the questions that the prosecutor asked, but you don't have to. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I've already stated everything.
All right, you can go ahead and retake your seat at the
Thank you.
table. And do you rest your case? Ms. Crofton, do you rest does the defense rest?
Yes, I did.
Okay, go ahead and have a seat. Mrs. Moore, did the state wish to present any testimony or evidence in rebuttal?
No, Your Honor.
Did the state wish to make any argument?
We'd rest on the evidence, Your Honor.
You have the right to make what's called a closing argument or a summation at this time, Ms. Crofton. You can't bring up anything that wasn't testified to or there wasn't an exhibit that was entered into evidence. and you're not required to make the argument, and your argument itself is not considered evidence, but it is your one opportunity to argue why you feel the state has failed to meet its burden of proof. Is there anything you'd like to say before I render a verdict here today?
It's really just, yes, that I feel, and also growing up in England, we do get black ice there a lot. I've driven on ice, but not very much. I've avoided it to avoid crashes. I'm a very careful driver. I would rather avoid a crash, so I wouldn't skydive because it eradicates the risk, but in this state and this country and with working, I have to sometimes drive in inclement weather. I didn't want to. I would have called off and I would do so again, where I would really, I just need to not go in. I would do so again of contacting, I guess, just contact the receptionist and saying I can't come in and making my own decision. So I think that safety overrides work. And so in this instance, I don't think I deserve the citation. I understand the law, and I understand there were lots of other crashes that morning, some of which did not end up with the vehicle or the people surviving. It was a really, really, really bad set of weather. It did change very regularly. It changed probably every 15 minutes, depending on where you were, what the roads were. I don't feel somebody could have stopped the crash once it was slipping. But again, the only way I think I would have avoided it would be to not go at all. And really, the hindsight, preparing the driveway in the car was maybe not the right thing to do. The right thing to do would be to just call off of work. But I do feel that while I was crashing and while I was in my car, I maintained as best of control as I could. During the crash itself, I was trying to eliminate the risk of hitting personal property or flipping the car or damaging the area. There's a bridge near there or going into the river. So I feel in actual fact that I maintained as best control as somebody could, given the crash, that I did okay because I didn't get injured and my car is usable and I didn't hurt anybody and I didn't hurt any property. So I really regret that this has happened. I would not do it again. I'm going to call off work next time when there's a snow and freezing rain, and I'm just asking, if possible, to change the citation, but I understand what the law is to do with, in this state, the weather, and to do with that's no reason that you should always maintain control, but in my instance, I wasn't.
All right.
I was in control, but then once I was losing control of the car, I couldn't stop it crashing.
All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Crofton. Because the state has the burden of proof, they get the opportunity to make what's called a rebuttal closing argument. Did the state wish to avail itself of that privilege?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay. Well, I think you've identified the issue yourself, Ms. Crofton, in your closing argument. This law is incredibly harsh and unforgiving. In essence, it says, you know, if you're aware of circumstances and conditions as you're operating your vehicle, you have to operate it in a way such as to maintain reasonable control over it. I think I might have mentioned, you said something about emergency. I must have mentioned something about that at your arraignment because you were arraigned here in the Eastern Division. And that's true. There are certain things that, you know, if a deer jumps out in front of you, that's an unforeseeable event. If a car shoots out in front of you, that's an unforeseeable event. But the testimony showed pretty clearly that both you and your partner were very aware of the conditions at the time, and despite your best efforts to be as careful as possible, were unable to avoid having the slide and ultimately the accident. And the law would say, under those circumstances, it's what we call strict liability. So they don't have to prove that you were negligent. They don't have to prove that you were reckless or that you purposely or intentionally wrecked your vehicle. They just had to show that under the conditions then existing, you failed to exercise due caution to be able to maintain reasonable control. So, as I said, the law is pretty harsh. I believe that the state has met its burden of proof here, and I'm going to go ahead and enter a guilty finding. You have a right to make a statement before I make a decision about your fine, and after I ultimately impose the sentence, I'll explain to you how you can appeal my verdict in whatever sentence I impose. But before that, is there anything else you want to say? All right, Mrs. Moore, did the state wish to be heard? I'm sure I asked you this at your arraignment, but where do you work again?
The Granville Inn.
That's right, Granville Inn. Okay, and I can't remember what you do there?
Sorry, I'm just a server.
Take a moment. Well, Ms. Crofton, the court's going to go ahead and impose a fine of $25 in order that you pay the court cost. I've already checked off that proof of insurance has been satisfied. You showed that to the Trooper Myers, so you don't have to worry about that. In a moment, you'll be taken to the clerk's office where they'll give you the details about how much you actually owe and what your options as far as payments are concerned. Now, as I mentioned, and you feel free to grab a tissue if you need one there, you have a right to appeal my verdict and my sentence. You have a right to obtain a transcript of today's proceedings and a right to file a notice of appeal within 30 days of today's date. You have a right to hire counsel to assist you with the appeal, but for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of the trial, you're not eligible to have those things provided to you for free. So with that, Ms. Crofton, do you have any questions either as to the sentence that I've imposed or your rights to appeal?
No, thank you.
Anything further, Mrs. Moore? Very well. Court will stand in recess.
All rise.